Avengers! Assemble.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Joy Clicks. This is the world of Marvel coming back with a vengeance. I'm your director, Christian Buckley, joined by the Apex legend, Jack Martin.
Excelsior, Christian. How's it going?
I'm doing good. It feels good to be talking about Marvel again with you because it's been so long. But
We had the utter drought of Marvel stuff after Far From Home, specifically in the MCU. And we were supposed to get that Black Widow movie, got pushed to the fall. We were supposed to get all the Disney Plus shows, some supposed to be happening in August. Those got pushed a little bit. So it's been a little sad, but happy to be back talking Marvel with you once again.
Absolutely. So for those returning to this show, you see Excelsior's updated in your podcast feed again. What's going on? We'll give a little brief rundown. We'll get more into the plan for the show later in this episode, but basically, Excelsior is back under a new direction. We are going to be focusing exclusively on Marvel's Avengers coming to PS4, Xbox One, and next-gen consoles. You can expect a new episode every week, probably floating in the realm of 20 to 30 minutes. We're going to be going over updates for the show, or updates for the game, weekly resets, challenges, DLC, leaks, rumors, community pulse on the state of the game. And we just want to establish a place for people to come to for this game because there is not any yet. And Jack, let me tell you, that means we are the #1 Marvel's Avengers game podcast on the internet.
I'm going to quote Plankton here from SpongeBob. What better way is there to win than by default?
Yeah.
We did it, Christian.
We did. So this show is available on podcast services, like I said before. We're going to have a YouTube version that's going to be featuring some gameplay of some of my sessions throughout the week. So if you're curious about that, youtube.com/joyclicks is where you can see the video version. And like I said, podcast feeds, if you have a podcast app, it's probably listed on there under Excelsior or Joyclicks. But that's it for the old housekeeping stuff. Jack, let's talk about this game.
Let's do it, because this has been a roller coaster of a game.
Yeah, it has been. Very briefly, the game was announced and revealed at E3 2019. Well, it was announced in 2017, but it was revealed at E3 2019. It was mixed. I think you and I fell on different spectrums. I was excited for it. I gave him the benefit of the doubt. I like Destiny. But I know in conversations with you, you were like, they have some work to do, right?
Right. For me, Destiny didn't hit. And the sort of like looter shooter, as it's been called recently, hasn't really done it for me. So I was very cautious about this game. I was pretty much down on it. I wasn't gonna pick it up. But yeah, like the initial reveal was sort of lower for me. I don't think the game looked like graphically good. And I think the focus on multiplayer didn't really catch my eye. Much more of a single player guy. So
Sure.
this didn't really do it for me when it was first announced.
Yeah, and ever since the launch, or the reveal, as time went on and they showed the game more and more, I was losing faith. But thankfully, the second War Table this summer, I think, was a great showing. And it led straight into this beta. So going into the beta, it began the first or second weekend of August for PS4 pre-orders. I got in on that because I really wanted to give it a shot. You know, there's not many other games coming up this fall that I'm super stoked for. So I was like, you know what? I love Marvel enough that I should probably get in as early as I can and give it a shot. So I went in a little tempered, expecting it to be kind of bad. And I was honestly blown away with how much fun I was having with it that first day.
Yeah, for me, when I played it by myself, I didn't love it. I kind of, the way they were showing it kind of matched up with my experience where I just wasn't really into it. I didn't think there wasn't a lot of meat on the bone.
Sure.
But it wasn't until I started playing with you in the beta that I was like, okay, this is starting to click. Where it really is more of a Destiny-like experience where you're going through with someone or a group of people and completing these missions or raids or whatever they end up being and getting gear and stuff like that. And I think that's where this game shines.
So do you think that based on the way the game was shown pre-launch of this beta and then your experience with the beta, you've sort of seen the game for what it is now, and like, has anything in this beta surprised you? You know, like I know you sort of came to terms with what the game is and what you're finding to like about it, but was there anything about the beta or your experience with it that really surprised you after some mixed talk from early press demos?
Yeah, I think the way people originally described this game back in like 2019 when they saw like the hands-off demos
Mm-hmm.
is that it felt like a licensed early mid 2000s game, which is not good.
Yeah.
Like if a very generic feeling to it is what people described it as. But as I started playing it more in the beta, it seemed a little more, in fact, much more in depth than that. Like each character has their own abilities. The skill tree that we've been looking through is only one page of what they're actually gonna be, and even that is super in depth, in which you can change like different abilities and stuff like that. And yeah, I was pleasantly surprised, specifically with Iron Man. I didn't think I would be enjoying Iron Man all that much, but yeah, he's my go-to right now. He's my main.
It's funny you say that because I've been pretty active on keeping tabs on the subreddit for the game, which is supported by the devs. It's r/play Avengers, and a lot of people on there are in the same camp as you, and I'm one of them, where we all went into this beta expecting to main one of these four characters, being Iron Man, Black Widow, Hulk, or Kamala, and we're kind of surprised of which hero actually grabbed us the most, because I was ready to go into this beta to main Hulk, right? And Hulk really honestly let me down a little bit in the story content, because the brunt of that first couple hours is Hulk and Kamala. And I thought Kamala was fun, but Hulk, I wasn't feeling it. I thought he played pretty good in the opening A-Day mission, and then he played best against Abomination. That's before, again, I upgraded Hulk. But the character that stood out to me the most, and I spent so much time with over the course of August and all these beta weekends, is Black Widow. And she is a blast to play. She's basically Spider-Man with her like grapple zips and how agile she is, and I love it. She plays great.
Yeah, I think that it's funny how like people have been surprised by the characters that have taken them, because from afar it's like, I feel like people usually will just go and choose the characters they love most from the movies or the comics. And yeah, it turns out it's just whichever one is just fun to play, and which I guess makes sense for a game, because you want to play whatever feels best. And for me, that's Iron Man. I love the ranged aspects of him. He's okay in melee, but like he really shines with repulsors, with lasers. I haven't messed around with the rockets all that much, but I really like the variety in terms of combat you can do with any of the characters. Because like even with Black Widow, I imagine you can like pull back with her pistols or Uzis or whatever she has, but you can really like go up close and use some of her melee abilities as well.
Yeah, and what you said earlier about the depth, I think, is key to why that variety shines so well, because as you do progress through these skill trees with any of the characters I mess with, but again, specifically speaking to Widow, like, you're upgrading her guns, you're upgrading her arsenal even. Like, I start out with dualies, and then I can get Uzis, and then I got a Magnum, and they have their own stats, they have their own modifiers. Combat evolves past simply her batons and punches. Like, some of the upgrades I got in the skill trees that I really liked were sort of reminiscent of her move style from the MCU. One I specifically liked calling out was the scene in Avengers where she's introduced, like, strapped to the chair, and then she breaks out of the chair, does, like, the back fold springboard forward, and then just, like, completely destroys this guy. That's unlockable as a move, and I loved doing that in the game. And I really think it's hit a nice balance so far of making the characters feel the way we want them to feel, having seen them in live action for a decade, but still giving them their own flair. And I think, again, it's not necessarily something you see on the surface, but if you give it the time, it shines through.
Yeah, and I think they really do respect like all the characters, and especially the MCU, I feel, because there's a lot of emotes and even the move that you were talking about that are specifically from the MCU.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like within the past decade, that's where people's affinity with characters have gone, and a lot of people have been introduced to is through
Mm-hmm.
those movies. So I feel like they really do respect that, while also being its own thing. This
Mm-hmm.
isn't the MCU. It's his own Square Enix Crystal Dynamics world, and I think they pretty much nail that balance.
Yeah, and even though we didn't get to play as Cap and Thor outside of the A-Day mission, from the little time we had with them, I think based on what we've seen, they fall into that same sort of camp of like treated with respect. They feel good. I went in, or I've been going into this game expecting to main Thor at launch, and I'm still expecting to do that as much as I love my time with Widow. But do you think when you get your hands on the full game, you're gonna skew away from Iron Man, or has he stolen your heart?
I'll have to see because playing the beta, like I'm basically just keeping Iron Man right now because I don't want to go through like the process of leveling up characters and then just kind of losing that. I don't mind
Sure.
that progress doesn't carry over from the beta, but I might mess around by myself with maybe Kamala, maybe with Black Widow as well, just to like
Mm-hmm.
get a taste. Hulk really didn't do it for me. I agree with you on the Abomination mission. I think the boss fight was the best part. Everything else just didn't feel right. He's supposed to be a tank, but I feel like he doesn't really even do that much damage compared to other characters.
Yeah,
Personally,
that was the downside where leveling him up, I started to feel that a lot more. It was just out the gate. It was like, is this really how we want to play Hulk? But
yeah,
um, it grows for sure.
yeah. But I think I will I'll definitely mess around with other characters in the beta.
Hmm.
Um, as for the main game, Hawkeye looks cool. I know that's
Yeah.
not at launch, but I know you definitely got your eyes set on him. I think I'll mess with him a little bit as well.
Hmm.
And I'm interested to see how Cap plays because I liked him in the 8A demo. He's very similar to Batman in the Arkham games, which I think is
Yeah.
great.
Hmm.
The one thing that I was disappointed with was that the vault move is a hold circle rather than double tap a button. And I think that's
Yeah.
pretty sluggish for that
Hmm.
character. So I hope that's somewhat improved.
Yeah. The whole dodge thing, it feels weird doing it with Hulk. I agree with you. It feels like it should be a little more snappy. And I've been playing Widow so much, right? I never use that dodge. Like
Yeah.
I just jump out of the way if there's something incoming or if I have to vault. Like I just don't bother doing the circle because it just feels so slow.
Yeah. I do hope they improve that because it's utterly useless at this
Yeah,
point. Because,
yeah,
yeah, I
and
don't use it. You don't use it. I feel like a lot of people don't mess with that.
yeah, and to the credit of Crystal Dynamics, so far in these 3 weekends, they have made some pretty solid changes outside the standard bug fixes and stability updates. The most recent patch for this new final weekend of the beta seems like it's the most significant. I have a list of all the changes they've made for this weekend that I can run through real quick.
Sure.
So they added this is the 1.4 beta update. They added an option in settings to adjust the camera shake stability or sensitivity, which was a huge issue for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
Decreasing the amount of motion blur during sprinting and flying, which from our experience, shutting that off was very noticeable in terms of making the game a little more smooth. They also worked on some matchmaking stuff. They added a ultra wide combat camera distance, improved vaulting. So I didn't try vaulting today, but maybe it's fixed, Jack.
Yeah, we should mess around with that.
And again, some pretty standard bugs that like multiple heroes respawning in some cases, game crashes, some optimization for saves, loot drops, things like that. So they've been listening. You know, we do know that they will be adding a ping system as well sometime around launch, which is another feature that we've all sort of come to the same consensus of this game needs a ping system.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, I think it should have a compass that most games have now. Most
Yeah.
first-person shooters, I'll say.
Mm-hmm.
So, like both, I think it should have the ping system, which I think is necessary, as well as the compass to sort of call out some directions.
Yeah. So based on all the fixes they implemented this weekend and again how realistic some of our issues seem right now, like with the vaulting, making that a little tighter. I still want like a particles effect slider just to really smooth out the frame rate on PlayStation 4 Pro, which is where I'm playing. But yeah, I have faith they'll be pretty responsive to the major community issues. So we talked a little bit about what this game is. It's essentially two games. From the beta missions we saw of the story, there is what I'm assuming is going to be maybe like a 15 to 20 hour main campaign about Kamala Khan reuniting the Avengers, saving the day, resuscitating Captain America, and reassembling. From your time with these story missions, I know you weren't too hot on them, but is there any hope you have for where the story could go, or if it could grab you?
Yeah, I think the one thing I didn't like was the sort of interstitial moments where it was like still frames of characters. Like I think it was Bruce Banner in the courtroom. Do you remember that in the beta?
Yeah.
I hope it's not that. I hope we get some cutscenes, and we have obviously got some cutscenes. So I hope it's more of a focus on that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think this story is going to be stellar. I think it'll just be fine. I think the main focus of this game is multiplayer.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not really expecting much from the campaign. The one thing that I do like about it that's different is Miss Marvel's sort of deal in this game, is that she's like trying to reunite the Avengers. I think that's interesting specifically because she's a character that I feel like hasn't really gotten her time to shine in the greater Marvel verse, I suppose. I'm not super familiar with her in the comics, but she obviously is not in the MCU right now.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think that's where most people's Avengers knowledge comes from, myself included. So it's good to see her have such a prominent role in this game.
Yeah, and I think it's also a really good idea to centralize the story through the perspective of a fangirl, going into this game, which has some of the same heroes that we've all been fanning over for the past decade, So I think introducing this take on the Avengers through the perspective of a fan in that universe as fans is a really smart idea, personally.
Yeah, it's very meta.
Yeah. So I'm pretty hopeful for the story. I haven't played the Crystal Dynamics Tomb Raider games, but from what I hear, they're pretty fun stories. And I think that's what I'm expecting here. I'm not expecting some deep, rich storytelling. I think it's going to be a serviceable Spider-Man level story, probably a safe story for these types of characters and our knowledge of them, but entertaining nonetheless.
Yeah, it'll be fine. I don't think we're obviously. I mean, this is a high bar, of course. We're not getting a Naughty Dog story here,
Right.
And no one expected that.
Mm-hmm. I will say I'll push back a little bit based on the way they've been pitching it, though, because we brought up Hawkeye coming post-launch. It sounds like all these heroes are gonna have a maybe 1 to 2 hour individual story campaign post-launch. So I could see them build a universe that is reliant on story, but I think what you were saying of this game is bread and butter being the multiplayer. I think that's what carries it in the in-between. I do think story is important to this world, but it's probably going to be coasting on the multiplayer.
Yeah, I think the story is the frame to set everything in place, and I think multiplayer is the meat and potatoes.
Yeah, I think you're right. So the comparisons to Destiny, I think, are warranted, for the multiplayer component here, because it is PvE combat. It is single player or grouping up with your friends or randoms online, running through pretty generic areas, but man, I think the combat's satisfying enough, and the conversations that come from playing this with your friends make it enjoyable enough that I really don't mind if Thor's like, oh yes, go here and hack this terminal.
Yeah,
it
satisfies that sort of niche of just playing and having fun with your friends and not really caring about what's actually going on. Of course, once the raids and strikes come into place, then you'll actually be focused on the mission at hand. But it's mostly just a game to have fun with your friends and to just kind of mess around. And I think Marvel, that sort of brand and IP is the draw for this game.
I think you're right. And if we want to compare it to the Marvel experience from other mediums, I think this fits in that same ballpark, right? there's an argument to be had about the depth of the MCU, but regardless, you go to the MCU, you have a fun time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is filling that sort of equivalent. It's popcorn for me.
100%.
So we talked about combat, we talked about hero variety, we covered the story and the progression. I want to throw this out there while we're still comparing this game to other games like it. I think if you're worried and you come to terms with the fact that this game is Ultimate Alliance with a hell ton of money behind it, a hell ton? That's not a word, right?
Hell ton.
That's
Let's
the hell
let's
ton?
say that's a word.
This game has a lot of money behind it. It is the same structure and format of Ultimate Alliance, but if you put like AAA story behind it, AAA design tendencies, I guess. If you go in with that, you can only be surprised, and I think that's the best way to look at this game.
Yeah, I think it's really important when talking about this game to temper expectations. Like what we've been saying, you're not going to get like an A+ story. And even overall, you're not going to get like an A+ experience. This is more of the it's fun to play, you're going to have fun with your friends, and that's kind of all it is, but I think that's enough. I do. I think that's enough to get people in and just have a good time. It doesn't take itself very seriously at all. It's mostly just there to be a fun experience.
Yeah, I agree with you. So before we dive into what the future of the show is, I thought we could throw out a few beta tips, considering this is the final weekend and it's accessible to everybody now. I have two main things that I want to highlight with my 3 weekends. Make sure you're upgrading your gear because that's pretty essential. There are several points in these multiplayer missions they give you for the beta where you can easily die.
Oh, absolutely.
It's especially if you're playing on your own, it's pretty easy to get overwhelmed if you're underleveled, and I think upgrading the gear is the solution there. You'll notice as you play the game, you have a individual level and a power level. The gear is tied to the power level, so you're definitely going to want to constantly be swapping out the gear you're getting. Thankfully, this game has something that's genius for one of these gear games. If you hold down on PlayStation the L2 button in your gear menu, it will automatically equip all your best statted gear. So it saves the hassle of like cycling through all these numbers and boring stat information. Like just a simple hold of a button and you're good to go.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the best, most accessible feature in this game in terms of leveling. Because I'm often intimidated by inventory. And I'm like, I don't want to read all this, like what amounts to paragraphs of information in term like for all the gear. So just having that button there, being like, I know I'm gonna be at peak level after hitting this button, it's really nice. Appreciate that.
Yeah, and as someone who wasn't huge on Destiny because of a variety of reasons, do you feel like this game is making it a little more welcoming on that level?
Yeah, I feel like this is more welcoming than like compared to Destiny because of the Marvel brand, right? Like to make a comparison, I think Battlefront for Star Wars is sort of accessible because, and it's not super in depth because it has that Star Wars name attached to it. Sure. And I think this serves like a similar role where it has the name Marvel attached to it, Avengers. You know what you're going to get, and they want to cast a wide net. It's not going to be like super hardcore of a game. So it's going to be fairly casual for people to get into it. But there's that point where you can also like go much more in depth with it in terms of raids and strikes and stuff like that. So it's one of those easy to learn, hard to master games, I suppose you could say.
Yeah. And again, we've only played the beta, right? I've probably put like 20 hours into it over the course of the 3 weekends, but I think that based on the taste they've given us, what's left and the end game stuff, which they haven't really fully explored yet, is going to give even more of that challenge and require teamwork. So I'm excited for that personally.
Yeah, absolutely.
The only other thing I wanted to highlight for people diving into the beta, look for secrets, because there's some secrets in this game, both in the story missions and in the drop zones and war zones, because the thing that really stood out to me and that I hope is in the main game is there's a secret mission you can unlock by dropping into an area in the Pacific Northwest and finding a shield bunker, which was introduced in the one of the story missions. So if the community has to work together to find these secrets and take on like redacted secret top secret missions, I think that's going to be a lot of fun.
For sure. I like that like community aspect where people are like trying to dive into these secrets, and it takes like the whole community of like redditors to be like, what does this actually do? So yeah, that's definitely exciting, and I guarantee you that there's a lot more of that in the main game.
Definitely. But that's all I have put aside for beta tips with my time in this game. Jack, is there anything I haven't hit on for the beta that you think is worth mentioning for people diving in?
I would say I would just reiterate like spend more time with your gear. There's also like before you're about to start a mission, there's your inventory locker, which is all the gear that you can't currently hold in your current inventory, and a lot of that can be lost because like you're not paying attention to it, and a lot of that is like the sort of higher level stuff that you get eventually that just automatically goes there. So be sure to discard your smaller gear and like your less leveled gear because you just don't need that. There's no point of having it. Discard that, scrap it, so that your higher level gear can be focused there.
Yeah. I'll add on also, make sure you're spending your skill points because it's easy to forget that you're earning them, and they will help you feel a lot more powerful. So, before the final thing I have on the docket for this initial episode is planning out our roadmap, if you will. So, before we get to that, I just wanted to ask you one final question. Leaving the beta and going into the full launch of this game, is there like any thing that was a negative to you or really stood out that you hope changes by launch that we haven't really seen implemented yet?
In terms of gameplay,
Yeah, gameplay.
it was the vaulting thing for me with those characters. I guess we'll have to test it out because they did patch it into the beta. That was pretty big for me. My negatives are more towards the story aspect. I don't think it's going to be all that great. But for what this is Destiny, essentially, mixed with Ultimate Alliance. So I guess it doesn't really matter in the end. So for what the game is, we should just sort of accept it. Obviously, it's not going to be the single-player game that some of us kind of wanted it to be. But for what it is, I think it's a really good multiplayer game.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think might be a hot take, but I think this is the Avengers game that can exist in the year 2020. Like, I think it's if you wanted to make an Avengers game, this is the game you make, I think, in the current state of games. So with that in mind, comparing it to all its contemporaries, I've been there for a lot of them, Destiny, I played some Division, I tried the Anthem beta. I think a lot of the hiccups that came with those games, Avengers so far has the hindsight of their issues that they can really prioritize making sure they get right, which it seems like they are so far when it comes to gear and the variety of missions, or the number of missions, I should say. And I do think because it is that Marvel brand, you're going to have out the gate a more fun story campaign than any of the things that I just listed when they launched. So I do think there's a benefit there. So, Jack, why don't we spill the beans on what this show is going to look like for the next few weeks?
Let's spill them.
So this is the first episode, right? This is dropping the weekend of the beta. We have one more episode pre-launch. That episode is going to be diving a little deeper into our thoughts on the story we've seen so far, as well as recapping the Road to A-Day comic book line that has been releasing on the road to launch of this game. So that will be dropping next week. I don't think we've decided on a recording or release date yet. That's probably going to be tied to when the weekly reset is for this game. So we'll wait and see on that. But Yeah, next weekend we'll be covering the prequel, essentially, to this game. The following week is launch week. I will be getting this game on September 1st because I got the early access version. I'm going to be streaming as much of the campaign as I can that week on twitch.tv/Chris and Buckley. So if you're not able to get the game at launch, if you're curious for the story, I'll be live pretty much as often as I can be playing through that story. So as long as the recording schedule works out, that week will be impressions from myself and Jack. Following week will be a little more in-depth about later game stuff, and the 6 weeks after launch will be more what's new to the game this week, what are the updates they're making, what are the updates Crystal's promising, when's the DLC dropping, more community recommended discussions on issues the community's having, things we want to see improved, changed, added, and yeah, that's what it's looking like right now.
Very exciting.
Yeah. So I guess we can reiterate, the show is available on podcast services like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, a variety of others, under the name Excelsior, a Marvel's Avengers podcast. So, like I said, we are the #1 Marvel's Avengers podcast right now. I would like to retain that title.
Let's keep it that way.
So, if you're new to the show, if you're returning to Excelsior, we would very much appreciate 5-star reviews, leaving a rating or a review on the podcast service of your choice. If you're not on Apple and you want to help the show, just download the app, pop over there, hit 5 stars, golden. We are also on YouTube, like I said. JoyClicks is very close to the 2,000 sub mark. We're going to be doing some group streams on the YouTube channel post-launch for this game if you want to see some more of that. And if you want to get involved with this show more directly, we have a Patreon. Patreon.com/JoyClicks is where you can go to support the show at a variety of tiers, the $1, $2, and $5 tier, for early access, influence over this show, submitting topics, talking points, and producer credit. So that's your role in the coming weeks as a listener or viewer. We greatly appreciate you. We love you for it. But Jack, where can the listeners find you?
Sure. You can follow me at FascinatedJack on Twitter and Instagram. Would love a good subscription to JoyClicks on YouTube. And we also have a Pokemon show over there called My First Mon. Christian and I are playing through Pokemon Crystal. Me for the first time. Christian for probably the third time?
Yeah, it's second.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's a good time.
Yeah. You can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Twitch, like I said, if you want to be there for those Avengers story streams, at Chris and Buckley. And the show has a Twitter itself, at Excelsior JC. You can follow us there, or the standard at JoyClicks Twitter account for detailed updates on this show, our topics we're covering, our schedules, and other smaller updates about the show. And like I said before, youtube.com/JoyClicks is where the video version of the podcast will be hosted. And that's everything. So, Jack, I'm very excited to play more of this game with you.
Me too. It's been a blast so far, and I'm looking forward to the main game.
Yeah, and listeners, I hope you're enjoying the beta this weekend as well. Let us know what you think in the comments on YouTube or adding us on Twitter, because I think this game's going to be a lot bigger than some people have been speculating. Like, I feel like it's going to be in that Days Gone camp of like, oh, so nobody talked about it, but it's like top 5 bestsellers of the year.
Yeah, and it's also dropping during a pretty lull period in gaming, so I think it's going to do quite well.
I agree. Pretty low period for the Marvel stuff as well, so I think this is like the correct time to drop this game.
Absolutely.
Well, until next week, though, Excelsior.
Excelsior.